I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. We're here on another Mondays, and today we have questions to answer. So let's go ahead and get with it. And our first question comes from Jerry, and Jerry asks, what's your view on the new Vortex Razor HD Gen 2 4.5 to 27 by 56 power scope? Well, Jerry, unfortunately, I have not got my hands on, or rather I should say I have not got that scope on a rifle yet. We don't have one into T&E yet. We've talked to Vortex about it. They're really short in supply of T&E models right now, and unfortunately I just don't have the cash to drop on one at this point. So we have to wait in line until we can get a T&E. I have got a chance to get my hands on it out at SHOT Show and then again at K&M Precision. When we were down there for the PRS match, they have one to pass around, and we got to look at the optics in it, got to look at the controls, and it seems to be a very solid scope. Vortex has really kept up with the top of the game. The turrets are pretty massive turrets, but they're more low profile than some of the other scopes that are out there. When you pop them up to unlock them, to do the adjustments on them, they don't come up quite as far as some of the other scopes that are out there right now as well. They come up very short, so when you are using the scope on an actual stage and you're dialing, you can keep it unlocked and it's not really sticking up high above the top of the optic. The optical clarity was very good. It's at least equivalent to the 5 to 20 power Razor that I currently have, and I'm a big fan of that scope as well. So I'm really interested in actually getting the new Gen 2 Razor out, putting it on one of our precision rifles and giving it a run. So hopefully by the time that we are done with some of the other scopes in our lineup right now, we'll be able to get a hold of one of those Razors and give it a real review other than just a general first impressions. Kale asks, hi John, what's your brass annealing regime, and do you go with a Girard machine you spoke of in earlier episodes? Cheers. Well, my regimen for annealing brass is pretty much just anneal it when it needs it. With the 260 brass and 243, I'm trying to stay around 3 firings. After the 3rd firing, annealing it. You can anneal more often than that, but because I don't actually have an annealer here, I have to go over to a friend's house and borrow his. Then 3 firings is a good option for me. With 308 brass, I tend to run 308 brass considerably further than that before I bother annealing it. In my opinion, 308 brass, unless you're really leaning on it hard, you're probably going to give up the primer pockets before you're going to start cracking necks on it. And that's just what I've seen with like Federal brass, which tends to be a little bit softer in the case head. How long you're going to get or how much you need to anneal is going to depend greatly upon the rifle that you're shooting it in. If you've got kind of a sloppy factory chamber, then you're going to work that brass a little bit more. If you're full length sizing, you're going to work that brass a little bit more. If you're neck sizing and you have a really tight match chamber, then you're not going to work that brass a whole lot, and so you may not need to anneal very often. So your individual circumstances are really going to depend upon what you need to do on it. Thomas asks, cheap ways to construct shooting bags, i.e. old pants or pillowcases, and what to use as filler, i.e. rice, sand, beans, or even tumbling media. Well, Thomas, I think I've gone over it before. A really easy way to construct a rear bag, or what we used to call a sand sock, is to take an old sock, and you can either use a Ziploc bag or some kind of liner, fill it with sand, drop it in that sock, knot it off as close to the end of the ball of the sock as you can get, and then you'll flip the outer part of that sock back over it to kind of give you an extra layer of protection. If you still got room, then you can knot that off. If not, just leave it be, or you can sew it shut. There are umpteen jillion different options out there. But that is really the cheapest, easiest, and that's what we used to do in the military because that stuff was available. No matter where you go on a Marine Corps base, you can find socks and you can find sand, so you can make a sand sock. If you want something that's going to be a little bit lighter, then what you can do is go to your local craft store, and they have these things called poly pellets, and it's what they put in like Beanie Babies or bean bags or any of that stuff, and it's just basically little granules of plastic, little plastic beads. They're smaller than airsoft beads, they're more dense than airsoft beads, so you can take those, you can fill a sock with those, same thing, knot it off, flip it back over itself, and that will work really, really well. Beans and rice you can use, but you have to keep them dry. If for some reason it gets wet, you sit in a puddle, it's raining outside, you've got to make sure that dries out because it'll rot, it'll start to get really nasty. Also, beans and rice can attract rodents, so if you have any kind of mouse problem out where you store your gear, you may end up finding a hole gnawed through the side of your pack and through your bean bag. So I don't recommend using rice or beans or any other kind of edible stuff. If need be, use gravel out of your driveway, use sand out of your kid's sandbox, something of that nature, but something that's not going to attract rodents. And that is really the cheapest and easiest way. But to be honest, with bean bags running in the $20 to $30 price range, I really would suggest you just go ahead and buy a purpose-built bean bag. The sand socks, they work fine, but a regular purpose-built bean bag is going to last longer and it's going to work better, in my opinion. I know there's some guys out there that have some sand socks that have lasted them 20, 30 years, so I just prefer to have a purpose-built piece of gear when I can. And our next question comes from Zoff, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It's XOF, so that sounds like Zoff to me. Is it better to resize the necks before or after trimming to length? Well, there are specific circumstances where you want to do this in a different order, but generally you want to resize first because that's what will stretch those necks out a little bit more, and then you want to trim to length. The firing process will cause that brass to stretch, and the resizing process can cause that brass to stretch. So afterwards, you want to trim to length, and then you'll be good to go. Now, exceptions to that rule are if you are making a different case from another case. For instance, if you're making 300 blackout brass from 223 brass, then you may want to go ahead and chop that down to a closer length before you try to resize it so you don't run into problems in your die. And that'll ease the process just a little bit. But from what I've seen from guys that do that, and I don't make 300 blackout brass, so I can't comment on the specific process, but from guys that I've talked to, what they will generally do is they'll get something cheap like a little chop saw, and they'll chop the brass to something close to the length it needs to be. They'll resize it, and then they'll do a final trim after they resize it to get it to a point where it's loadable. So for regular brass, 260, 308, etc., go ahead and resize it first and then trim it. Sometimes if you're running a tight chamber and you really aren't pushing that brass really hard, you may find that you can resize it a ton of times before you actually need to trim it back. Some brass just stops growing in tighter chambers, and then you really don't have to worry about it. Sometimes the brass will give up before you have to go back and trim it again. So resize first and then trim. Michael asks, which is better, ballistic tip bullets or hollow point bullets? Well, it's not a matter of which is better. It's a matter of what your final application is. For match type shooting, you want to go with a ballistic hollow point or a ballistic tip. When we talk about ballistic hollow points, there is a hole in the tip of the bullet, but that is not designed for expansion. What it is, it's a manufacturing artifact. It's left there from the tooling when they made the bullet. It is not designed to cause the bullet to expand. When we talk about hollow points, we are actually talking about a cavity that is designed to allow the bullet to expand. I hesitate to say that a polymer tip is better than an open tip. What I look for more often is I look for the consistency, the record of consistency in those bullets. Have I gotten boxes before where the tips have been wildly different? And I look for the ballistic coefficient on the bullets, because if I can get a much higher ballistic coefficient in a ballistic tip or a much higher ballistic coefficient in an open tip, then that's going to benefit me versus the actual construction of the tip. That seems like kind of a rambling answer, but the answer is it depends. Go with the higher ballistic coefficient and the more consistent point. Our next question is from Jeremy, and Jeremy asks, Mega Arms MKM 2-piece versus Megalithic 1-piece. Which would you choose and why? Well, Jeremy, it's funny you should ask that question because what I have right here is a Mega Arms Ma 10 Megalithic receiver set. And this is here because this is what we will be using for our next semi-automatic build. And there are really benefits and drawbacks to both type system. With the Megalithic receiver up here, you have one piece of aluminum that was used to machine into the handguard and the upper receiver. There are no seams here. It's just one chunk. Now, in my mind, that is a benefit because it's going to be a stronger system where you have the handguard into the upper receiver. There is less chance of anything coming loose, any damage, anything of that nature here. The two drawbacks that can come to mind, first of all, is to install the barrel. As you guys saw when we did our original Mega Arms build, you have to have a really long barrel wrench. Once you slide the barrel in and slide the barrel nut on top of it, this wrench has to go all the way through this handguard to engage the nut way down here at the receiver. Luckily, Mega Arms includes that specialized barrel nut or barrel wrench when you buy this receiver, so it's not an issue on finding the correct tooling. It's just a little bit of an added trouble. Once you get it installed though, that's a non-issue. You never think of it again. The only other drawback that I can think to this is while this is a very, very stout receiver, if for some reason you crush this forend here, then you're going to have to replace the entire upper receiver, or you're going to have to cut it back past the crushed area. There's not really any way for you to take that off and replace that with another part. With the MKM type receiver, I believe that you could probably buy another forend tube from Mega Arms and replace it if you damaged your current forend tube. So there's a benefit to there. Of course, the drawback with the MKM is the forend tube is held on with fasteners. Fasteners do have the ability to come loose, so that's another thing to bear in mind. Overall, I think Mega Arms has done a really good job on the Megalithic with opening this up and lightening this system up. Really, when you look at it and then you pick it up and hold it, it feels like it should be heavier than it actually is. And I really, really like the cool little bubble level they have here that pops out at the side. So that is a really neat feature, and that's what keeps it from being a monolithic upper and turns it into the megalithic upper, because the top rail is actually broken by the bubble level. Now the nice thing though is the way they designed this bubble level, it is the same height as the lugs on your Picatinny rail up here, and it is the same width as the lugs. So you should be able to drop a mounting piece right on top there, mount or rings or whatever, and not get in the way, but we'll try that later on when we start mounting stuff on here. But that is a compare and contrast really quickly of the MKM and the Megalithic. You're not going to go wrong with either. I think my preference is probably for the Megalithic, just for the simplicity back here. Our next question comes from Matthew, and Matthew asks, Mirage, how can it affect your point of impact, and what do you do to overcome it? Last Saturday, shoot at 600 meters involved particularly bad Mirage, and that had myself and most others struggling. Well, Matthew, there are a couple of things that you can do when you're running into Mirage. First of all, there are two different types of Mirage that you're going to encounter. There is barrel Mirage, where you've got the barrel hot enough that those heat waves are coming off of it, and that's obstructing your view through the scope, either barrel Mirage or suppressor Mirage. And if you routinely have problems with that, and you're in a competition environment where you're not really moving around and banging the rifle around, then you can try using a Mirage band. If you have a suppressor, you can use a suppressor cover, and that may help you out a little bit to reduce that barrel Mirage. Unfortunately, that's not going to do anything to reduce Mirage downrange, and that really can be a blessing and a pain at the same time. Mirage downrange is a blessing because if you understand how to adjust your rifle scope, then you can dial that Mirage in and you can really watch the wind change while you're on the gun shooting, and that can be an incredible help to get a good accurate wind call. In the same vein, if you've got your magnified optics cranked all the way up and that Mirage really starts boiling, it can make it difficult to see that target, especially when you're working with really precise steel targets in a wide open field. It can make it even difficult to identify them. We've been shooting fairly often when the targets get all beat up and they're gray now instead of nicely painted white, and you start trying to find the targets, and the Mirage will really cause them to blend into the background badly. What you can do there to help lessen the appearance of the Mirage is you can dial the magnification back on your scope. Now, this isn't going to lessen the Mirage. The Mirage is still out there. It's still having the same effects on the air, and it's still bending the light going through the air in the same way. But when you dial the magnification back, the Mirage is less apparent to you and it becomes less distracting. What you'll see when you really have that magnification cranked up, if you're able to see and identify your target will look like it's dancing up and down. It's like looking across heat waves on a desert road. You'll just get that little bounce up and down. What I was told long ago is that when you watch the target and you see it making its up and down movement, watch for wherever the target is at its lowest. Wherever the target is at its lowest, that's its true position. So you don't want to aim high, you want to aim at the lowest appearance of the target. That should be where it is, and the reason is because the heat waves are rising and they're causing that air to bend upwards, and so that gives you that appearance that the target is jumping up when it's really down below. So you don't want to aim underneath it, but aim at the lowest image that you get of the target. Now, I can't speak for the validity of the air bending in that, but it seems to work for me to aim for the lower version of that image. And I'm a power hog on my scope. I tend to like to keep my scope cranked up so I can see what the Mirage is doing. But for some shooters, it's just really distracting, and they would prefer to crank that magnification back and not really see what the Mirage is doing and not distract them from trying to get that fundamentals of marksmanship dialed in. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of ideas. Next time you're out at the range and that Mirage kicks up, try them. Try dialing your scope back, or try keeping your magnification at its maximum and try aiming for that lower image. There really isn't a right or wrong answer. It's all about what helps you deal with the environmental conditions that you're watching. Stefano asks, do you prefer the G1 or G7 model as a base to build a dope card? Great show. Well, Stefano, with the G1 or G7 ballistic models, you want to pick the one that most closely matches your actual bullet that you are using. If we're using something kind of short and fat like a 308 bullet, then the G1 is going to work pretty well. Now, we need to use velocity banded G1s, because if you just try to take a G1 from one velocity, then it's not going to be as correct as if you use a velocity banded G1, and that's where the G1 changes based on the velocity of the bullet. If you can use a banded G1 in a ballistic calculator that can account for the change in the bullet speed going down range, then that's going to give you a very accurate dope on a shorter, fatter bullet. Now, if you're using a VLD style bullet, the really pointy, slippery bullets that we use in the 6mm and 6.5mm, then you're going to want to stick to the G7. The G7 is designed to more closely match those bullets, so it's going to give you a more accurate model when you punch it into your ballistic calculator. So take a look at what bullet you use, take a look at the reference model they actually use for the G1 or G7, and then make a decision on which one your bullet most closely matches. Jason asks, how do I best avoid damaging the barrel crown when my rifle? I think you meant on his rifle. I got a neat little guy right here. I actually just picked this up the other day for from Triad Tactical. And first of all, most of my rifles have some type of muzzle device on the end of them, so I am not really worried about damaging the crown on those, because I can run that break into something pretty hard and I'm not going to damage anything unless I actually bend the end of the break to the point where it impinges on the bullet as it goes through. We're not going to have any issues. But I do have a couple of rifles that have unprotected crowns. They've got just standard target muzzles on them, and for those, a guy like we have right here is a good option, especially if you don't carry the rifle in a case. I very often am running a rifle in my Eberly stock, and when I stick the muzzle down in the Eberly stock, then I know it's pretty well protected. But if I'm going to carry it outside of that, or I'm going to strap it across a pack, then a scope and muzzle protector like this one from Triad Tactical is a really good option. This slides over your muzzle, and it's got an adjustable strap here, and then this drops in over your scope, and it's got 3 straps here that you can adjust to wrap around the bottom of the rifle and snap in. We've got Velcro covers front and back to protect the ends of your optics, and you can actually flip these open and shoot through if you wanted to. I'm not sure I would really do that, but that is an option. The straps can be configured wherever you want to configure them, and you get a little grab handle on top here that you can pick it up. In case you're one of those guys that cringes when you see us pick our rifles up by the scope. Really nice option, not that expensive. You'll forgive me, I can't remember what the purchase price was on this, but we'll leave a link in the description below. The version we just showed you is all US made. There are some cheaper ones out there on eBay and Amazon. Those are mostly made in China, and the materials and the construction are kind of shoddy on them. I mean, they'll work if you're really crimped on money, but I prefer the American-made versions. I know they're going to hold up a little bit better, and of course I like employing Americans wherever I can, especially when we're talking about my hobbies instead of something that's needed for day-to-day life. And our last question comes from Steve. Steve asks, Mexican match, quick way to get hunting/match ammo or a waste of a time? Well, what Steve's talking about when he says Mexican match is a common practice of taking lower grade ammunition, even ball ammunition, pulling the projectile off and then replacing that projectile with a match bullet. This is usually done in 308s. You can do it with ball ammo, popping off the 147 grain bullet and dropping on 168 grain Match King. Something of that nature. I do not recommend this. First of all, you're not doing any load workup. You're just pulling off a one bullet and sticking another bullet on there. In my opinion, it is not a good way to go. It also is not going to give you the most accurate result unless you're dumping that powder charge and you're reweighing that powder charge and putting it back together. Really, if you were going to do pull downs and you were going to mess around like this, then I would pull the ammo apart. I would weigh the charge. I would put the charge back in. I would make sure my charges are consistent across my ammo. But when it's all said and done, I would not recommend doing it. I would recommend just going ahead and loading your own precision ammo. Don't mess around with trying to replace the bullets with something else. If you need cheap hunting ammo, buy cheap hunting ammo. If you need precision ammo, you want the most precision that you can possibly get out of it. That was our last question for this week. I hope you guys have enjoyed this Mail Call Monday. A couple of real quick things before we go. You'll notice the rifle in front of me. This is our Beater 16-inch AR. We just got a new low-power optic. It's a 1:4 from Hi-Lux. And this is a really nifty scope. It is the CMR4-R, and it has a ballistic reticle in it. It is a second focal plane, but it does have mill turrets on it that are capped by these nice screw-on caps. It's illuminated, and it's a really nifty little lightweight scope. Now, of course, we have it mounted with an Alamo 4-star D-lock mount, and we're going to get this thing out and burn up some ammo through it and see how well it works out and see how well the ballistic reticle works with some regular old 55 grain ball ammo. So we'll get some chance to get some trigger time on it, and we'll come back to you and report to you how well this guy works. We also are working on a review for the Armageddon Gear GMS 15 charging handle that we have on here. We've been working with that, and so far the charging handle has worked really well. We've seen a couple of pros about it, a couple of drawbacks on it, and we're wrapping up the write-up on that. Once we get the write-up done and ready to go live, then we'll go ahead and do the review video and get it out to you guys. Finally, you'll notice that this rifle has a Law Tactical Gen 2 folding stock adapter on it, which allows us on a standard direct impingement AR-15 to fold the stock to the side and make it into a really nice compact package. Now, firing it in this position is not recommended. There have been some arguments online about it. You can safely fire one shot with the stock folded like this. The weapon will not cycle, so you'll have one empty case in the chamber, and you can cause damage to the adapter itself, but you are not going to cause damage to you. Once you close it, you can generally cycle that bolt and get the weapon back into service, but again, I do not recommend firing with this thing folded. We did it just to see how well it works, and we were able to get the weapon back into service. It functioned just fine, so no problems there. But Law Tactical, not confident or not content to rest on their laurels, they have released the Gen 3 folding stock adapter. I have been remiss in getting this out to you and actually talking about it, but we're going to bust it open here, and a couple of things real quickly. It has now its own installation tool, so you don't have to buy an extra tool. Comes with a nice tube of fire clean should you need lube. And it is a really nifty piece. They have trimmed down some weight on the adapter. They have trimmed down some of the unneeded aluminum here and really dropped a little bit of weight off of it, it looks like. It's a little bit more streamlined, and one of the cool things that they did is they lowered the hinge a little bit versus the Gen 2. And this gives you more room for clearance when you run that charging handle. They have changed up the hinge a little bit in the way it's designed, and I went ahead and snapped this closed, see if I can get it open without the leverage there. And it feels like the detent for locking it open and closed is a little bit deeper, a little bit stronger too. They have revised the latch now so that there shouldn't be damage to it if you need to fire it in the open position, or in the folded position rather. I still do not recommend that because there's just really no need for it. And then one of the biggest improvements that was asked for is the carrier extension, which takes up the space that you add when you install the adapter. The carrier extension is now toolless. You do not need any tools to install or remove it. So on those rifles that you couldn't break down with the carrier extension in place, that now makes maintenance a little bit easier. Also, if you swap upper receivers around quite often in your guns, then that may help you out in swapping them a little bit quicker without having to disassemble or reassemble anything. Once we get some time to get that adapter on a rifle, we're going to give you guys a full review on that. But I told the guys at Law Tactical that I would do a little bit of an unboxing and an overview on it, and I just hadn't had a chance up to this point. So that is the Law Tactical Gen 3 folding stock adapter. This is the Gen 2, and just looking at it right away, I'm really excited to get it on a rifle and get some trigger time with it and see how well the improvements work. That's it for this week. If you guys have any questions or comments, please leave the comments in the comment section down below, or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. If you've liked this video, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. It really does help us out. And until next week, get out and shoot!